on this episode of AK Podcasts.
The difference between a good kernel processed corn silage and excellent is still ranges from 9 cents a cow a day to a 24 cents a cow a day loss if it's not done correctly. So it's kind of bringing everything in together, and it's literally the Super Bowl day for your team of putting up feed.
You know you're a hay nerd when you walk into a hay barn and you just love that smell.
Doggone it, I got to put more corn in. I'm going to have to add some soybean meal. Wow, did that cost you a lot of money?
Put yourself in a crowded elevator and the elevator stops because, I don't know, the building's on fire.
I really like to ask them what's important to them.
We're here for the cow. She's giving us all the profits we need to maintain these facilities and buildings and employees. Man, let's take care of her.
Roadway, I would call it more as a roundabout. And it's kind of like a weird analogy where we're, as farmers, farming and raising these livestock up, and then themselves are kind of have their own, herd of microbes in their gut that they're raising up.
I have two great passions in my life. The one is people, and the second is cows. And I want to get the best out of them.
Hello, and welcome to AK Podcasts, where we explore science and nutrition behind livestock care and management with the best and the brightest in the business. I'm your host, Chris Radke, part of the sales department here at Agri-King. And with me today is a director of field services and a member of the sales management team, Mr. Mike Donaldson. Mike, how you doing? And what are we talking about today?
Doing very, very well. This is a special day, Chris. We've got our first in-studio guest. Other than the fact that all the magic is gone because he's realized it's just a corner of my house, I make look decent when we do these. But no, this should be pretty good. So what we're talking about today, Chris, right now, early part of August 26, there's certainly parts of the country that have started corn silage, finished corn silage, but through an awful lot of the world, everything's gearing up right now for corn silage harvest. And we thought this would be a good time to go over some of the things that can make the difference between having an okay crop and having a great crop of corn silage. So joining us today is Agri-King nutrition consultant Andrew Arens. Andrew has a very diverse background. He's an Agri-King nutrition consultant. He's been a custom heifer raiser. He owns a dairy farm. He does custom harvesting. And I thought that gave him a very unique perspective to bring to this topic. I've heard you describe this time of year, Andrew, as one of your absolute favorites because you just enjoy being in the chopper and being part of this equipment. What is it that gets you so excited about making corn silage?
Well, first of all, it takes you back to my youth as far as right down to the smell of it. It just still, after all these years, amazes me how we can say, hey, we're going to take 600 acres of 12-foot tall corn and stick it on that cement pad over there. And just the whole process of it. For me, it's kind of fun for our family. So it's kind of a family deal, but that's kind of the personal reasons. And the other thing is, as a nutrition consultant or as a dairy farmer, like this is game day. This is everything we've done to prepare from pre-planting stuff over the winter, getting the crop in, how we're going to fertilize it, how we spray it, right down to the harvesting of having everything ready, deciding when to chop. It's game day, and everything you've been working towards comes together at that, whether it's a 3-day period or a 2-week period, however long it takes you to chop. And the other thing is that, it's a big deal economically. Corn silage is predominantly one of our higher fed forages by far in most dairies in the upper Midwest. So it's like you're putting up 12 to 15 months worth of your most used silage coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So if you're off a little bit on your game day, like take kernel processing, for example. If the difference between a good kernel processed corn silage and excellent is still ranges from 9 cents a cow a day to a 24 cents a cow a day loss if it's not done correctly. So it's kind of bringing everything in together, and it's literally the Super Bowl day for your team of putting up feed.
Perfect. Well, I think it'd be helpful. Let's break making corn salads down into 3 areas. We can talk about the plant, dealing with when it's ready to harvest, things like that. The actual equipment that we're going to use, everything from a chopper to hauling, packing. And I will parenthetically say here that we certainly work with farms that put corn salads in upright silos, into ag bags. We are going to primarily be talking about bunkers and piles because so many more tons nationally goes into bunkers and piles. But just about everything except how many packing tractors you're going to use, it pertains to all aspects of making good corn silage.
Absolutely.
But then I also want to touch briefly on the people, your workforce, who's actually going to be doing this. So let's start with the plant. Like we said, how do you feel people make the best, most accurate decision about when they want to start chopping?
So I think it's an important conversation to have with your team, and team meaning, your nutritionist, whoever works with you as far as putting up feed. If you hire a custom harvester or if you put your feed up yourself, the main thing to start with is what's my target moisture level do I want? And there's not a right or wrong answer to that. Every dairy, every nutritionist might suggest something different, but the key is to say, hey, what's my range? What's too low? What's too high? And because still ultimately whole plant moisture is still the best way to determine that maturity of the corn silage. So first it's establishing that number. And then from there, kind of getting your management geared up to determine when you're at that appropriate moisture level, and to get everything lined up as far as getting whether you're chopping it yourself or whether you get the harvesting crew in there, that type of thing.
So I'm going out next week. One of our people in Wisconsin has what they call chipper days, and they have their clients, have farmers bring in bundles of corn. They throw it through a lawn and garden wood chipper just to mash it up enough. Then they'll cook it down using combination of costers, microwave, air fryers, whatever they want to do. I've also seen where people, I've been helping you chop, and someone's, another person you're going to chop for brings a bundle of corn stalks to the farm you're on in order to get it chopped up and see what they should be doing. How do you typically go about deciding that moisture out of those options?
So, both ways are excellent ways, and kind of gives you a general idea of where you're at. I do love in a lot of areas, geographically, the bringing out the shredder or chopper, having farms come to your place and feeding it through is the most common. And also, some guys, if you have your own choppers, like we'll go out in fields and we'll do like what we call like a little figure 8 pattern in the middle of the field and get a moisture reader off our chopper, then take it back to the farm and burn it down. Both ways are good. Communication is just excellent. From the person who sells you the corn, a lot of areas are kind of good at keeping you updated, saying, hey, this variety in your neck of the woods, it seems to be running about this moisture. So just talk to a lot of people, do what you can to get out in the field. If you have to take several areas and chop some corn down yourself, and either send it through a chopper shredder or like you were saying too, a lot of people bring corn to wherever we're chopping at and just will feed it through, put it on a pile, and then they get a representative sample. Is it perfect? No, but it's about as good as we can get it's the most accurate way we can kind of get an idea of where that moisture level is at.
So, and I know you said this is very individual to the farm. What are you looking for? What is the typical moisture range that you see people wanting to chop at?
I think that number seems to be right around 62%. Sure, there is a couple farms that we custom chop for that are looking more for that 66 to 68, but there is some farms in the last 5-6 years that are actually kind of shooting for that 58 to 60% moisture. But you have to keep in mind, if it's depending on how much you put up and everything, if you have a 2-week window where it takes you to harvest, that's kind of where you have to have that predetermined, and you have to know, did I get all my acres in the same week? Do I have, did we plant some in May 10th and then be finished up June 1st? You kind of have to take all that stuff into consideration, and you may have to start a little bit wetter than you'd like, to finish up just a little bit drier. So I mean, we kind of shoot for averages, but there's a lot that goes into that decision from like you said.
So when you're looking, you're gonna there's gonna be something you finish on. There's gonna be the last field you chopped. Do you feel then it's a combination of either delaying planting and or selecting a little longer day hybrid? I mean, some of this sounds like it has to take place back in the spring when you're actually going to put it in the ground to try and stage this the way you'd like it to work out, doesn't it?
Yeah. So it's very important. You bring up a very good point. So if you're going to harvest a lot of acres on your farm, you might have your corn may vary from a 99-day corn all the way up to 112-day corn. And then also if you get out there early and you start planting, we'll just use makeup dates. Say the last week of April, you get a good start, and all of a sudden you get rained off till the end of May. Then sometimes you may have to swap some corn out to get everything to line up. So planting is just as important as far as trying to manage your moisture levels at harvest as harvest actually is, trying to make sure if you need more time, if you have more tons to put up, that everything's spaced accordingly. So when you begin to chop, you can kind of move right through and because there's nothing worse than, and sometimes it happens, it's unavoidable, but there's nothing worse than you chop for a few days or a week, and then all of a sudden you have to shut everything down and then maybe cover the pile. Then you have to start up, a week or 2 weeks later because the rest of it's too wet. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but it's obviously the thing that we always want to try to.
This sort of has to do with the corn plant, so I'm going to stick it in here, but it isn't anything about when we're going to cut. But I know from talking with you that one of the things that when the situation is correct, you're a pretty strong believer in is not running that corn head as absolutely low to the ground as you can possibly get, but actually raising it up. Could you go into a little more detail why you think that's important and how high do you sometimes raise that head?
So for my own dairy and several dairies that we chop for that I also do the consulting for, we'll go in and chop a little bit higher, upwards of 14 to 18 inches, depending on the height of the corn as well. And if it's a good growing season, we may go up to that 20, 22 inches. If it's dry and it's a shorter plant, we, may still go higher than everybody else, but that might only be 12 inches or so. My take on that is that bottom part of the plant is usually so lignified. I mean, that's the base structure for this huge, tall plant, that most of it's lignified. And sure, it adds up as tons, makes you feel good when it's in the bunker. But when it's that much lignin, it's very little to hardly any of it is digestible. So I always kind of look at it as hey, that bottom 4 inches, we want to chop. Do we really want to go after that? Because basically I have to move that 4 inches of the bottom into my bunker, and then I got to feed it to the cows, and then it ultimately ends up in my manure pit. So that bottom part of the plant, that's going to end up back in the field anyways. You might as well just leave it there instead of trying to put it through your cow. And it's that undigestible where it's just going to end up in the manure pit. But that's a good conversation to have, with your nutritionist as well as part of the planning is, hey, how is our growing season? How does our plants look out there? What should our height be? Because it's very crucial to corn silage digestibility.
Interesting idea. So let's make you walk both sides of the road on this one. On one hand, you do custom harvesting, or your boys actually do a huge amount of it.
Yes.
But you're also a dairyman. So if I'm a dairyman who's going to use a custom harvester, do it this way. So I just decided that I'm going to sell my equipment. I'm going to have you come in and you're going to custom harvest my corn for me. I'm done doing it myself. What's the discussion you're going to have with me back in February, March, when I told you I was going to do this? How are we going to coordinate? What do you want me to be communicating to you? Because I'm used to going out in the morning going, yep, it's time. I'm going to cut today. And I can't very well go out in the morning, say, yep, it's time. Andrew better be here in an hour. That probably isn't going to happen, right?
Yeah. So that's a great question. We actually have to start having conversations in the winter about how many acres or how many total tons do you need in your pile? What's your desired cut length? What's your desired moisture level? how long does it take you to plant X amount of acres? How many day corn? What's the varieties you have? So that's the conversations that we start with. And then from there, it's kind of an update in the spring as planting goes on. I mean, 7 miles away from our farm could have completely different weather than what we have at ours. So just the communication and kind of knowing when corn is going in the ground. If somebody, gets a late start, is it, hey, you're going to change your how many day corn you're planting? So, and then obviously, when it comes to August, we're talking to a lot of guys about what kind of weather have you had? How is your corn drying down? Is it drought stress? We're seeing a little bit of that. Luckily in the last week or two, most of the upper Midwest has finally seen some rain. But we kind of start communicating on all that stuff. But it's very important to have that moisture conversation and particle length and all that stuff. So when we go into a farm, number one, we know when we're, kind of helps us coordinate on when we can get there, when we should be there, and everything's kind of taken care of. We have the chopper set for their desired particle length and KP. Generally I don't have anybody that wants us to do a poor job of kernel processing, so that's not much of a conversation for us. I understand the importance of it. We kind of have a good handle on that.
Well, you mentioned kernel processing, and that nicely leads us in to that second phase, which is going to be equipment. And let's start with the chopper. Now we're back. It doesn't matter whether it's one that I own or one that I hire. So when it comes to things like kernel processing, length of cut, tell me how you set your equipment up to get the results people want out of having you chop.
So everybody should have their kernel processor looked at. The kernel processors could do an average of so many thousands of tons, and then they have to be replaced. But have it looked at. That's going to vary on how hard you, quote unquote, how heavy you use it or how well of a job you do kernel processing your corn. You might wear through it a little bit quicker. But you need to know if you're going into a season and your kernel processor rolls are wore at 40%, which may not, you think, well, I got 40% life into them. But you have to kind of say, okay, 40% is only going to get me X amount of tons. Will that get me through the season? Then once you make that decision, and either it will get you through the season, or you have to say, okay, it's going to get me through 1,000 acres. I'll still have another 1,000 to do after that. You say, okay, I will stop and, it could take a few days to rebuild your kernel processor, or you could line up and say, hey, some dealerships have a kernel processor ready for you, so you can take yours in and they'll have one. So it's really only a couple hour job to change it out. But it's very important to know where you're at with that kernel processor and then make that decision whether it's going to get you through the season or whether you should replace it now or have a very good plan of attack and everything lined up. So mid-season, that you're ready to swap it out. And I will say when it gets down to that what a dealership will say, the last 10% of those rolls, it's very, very iffy. I mean, it's hard to do a fantastic job. Same with knives and shear bars. That stuff has got to be, if you have a little nick in your shear bar, you're just going to have an inconsistent cut. I don't care what particle length you're going for. All of a sudden, you're going to end up with these long leaves in there. So you want to start out with that stuff in good shape. And again, depending on how many acres you put through your machine, sometimes a shear bar might not make it through you put a new shear bar in, that might not make it through the whole season. So then you have to kind of always be checking it and saying, okay, once we get, I'll just use 1,000 acres as an example, we may have to flip that shear bar around. And so you have to understand how many tons you can put through that machine with where your equipment is at that point, just so you're kind of prepared to make it through the whole season.
So now go back to being a dairyman. What if you grab a handful of silage? What is your benchmark that the guy chopping for you has got his processor set up right?
So the goal is that my goal is to have 0 whole kernels in there. In fact, to have very little half kernels in there. There's nothing fun than looking at a handful of corn silage and all you see is powder, and you're trying to even find quarter kernels. I don't care what kind of processor you run for the most part, what kind of chopper you run, they're all capable of it. It's just having the machine set up right. And a lot of times it's just worn parts. And, one thing I find interesting, 20 years ago, we had, through Agri-King, we had a producer meeting on putting up corn silage and fermentation, that kind of thing. And I invited some custom harvesters in because one thing we always deal with as far as nutritionists is, and and I'll stick with this example of 20 years ago, is you're fighting with, I don't want to say fighting, but it's always a challenge with the custom harvester to get that kernel processor down, right? Well, the famous thing is, well, my nutritionist says it has to be. Well, the chopping crew, is probably going to think, well, just being a pain in the butt. I mean, they don't want to. So at that meeting, I invited some custom chopping crews in to our producer meeting. And by chance, I don't know, I thought, well, they can come get a good meal, have a few beers afterwards. It'd be just good to invite them. I was shocked at how they were, once they understood and they sat there and listened on the nutritionist side and the dairy farm side of why it is so important and what it costs if it's not processed correctly. It was awesome. These guys are like, oh my gosh, I never knew why it was so important. We just thought, they're just being a pain in the butt, and it's better for our chopper not to kernel process. So, like in so many things in any business, it's important that these people understand why. Now, I use the example 20 years ago. Now we have farms that are large enough to where they have their crop-based team and they have the dairy farm team. And the crop team, even though it's the same farm, they don't communicate. So what we've had success doing is going to these farms and having meetings, whether it's in the spring, winter, whatever, with the dairy side of the farm and the cropping side of the farm, the guys you put up to feed. And we have that conversation of why it has to be done that way. And once they understand the whys, it's more likely that it'll get done. So it's a communication between teams that can really bring it all together and make sure it gets done. I mean, it's like that with any business. I mean, that's one of the things, like with Agri-King, we have so many different teams, and Agri-King, our business has exploded in the last 10 years. And one of the reasons is because all of our different teams, if it's our research and development, our lab, what we see out in the field, there's a synergy where all the teams are working together, and it's a beautiful thing. So we need to make that happen on the dairy farm, whether it's a custom chopping crew, whether it's two brothers, one brother takes care of the cows and one sibling takes care of putting up the feed. They both need to talk and have an understanding of why it's so important, why we're having this conversation today. It's a huge financial impact to the business, the bottom line.
I know kernel processing gets a great deal more attention on corn silage than length of cut, but do you have a standard length of cut you typically look for?
For my farm and farms that I consult for, I like a finer cut. It's important. There's not a one. I mean, as a nutritionist, and that's kind of Agri-King's philosophy, is we try to get as much energy as we can out of every pound of forage that you have on farm. So, that's our philosophy. Now, there is some nutritionists who need a little bit longer particle length. They like to feed a lot of commodities, and in that example, they need more particle length because they're feeding more commodities to the cow. So there's not a right or wrong answer. I mean, my answer is I like it fine, but that's you have to talk with your nutritionist and your team and say, hey, this is, has to fit that program for how you're feeding cows.
Now, these next two questions about equipment might be laughingly silly or simple, but you still need to get them right.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about hauling out of a field, getting back to the barn. What's your standard for, there's obviously a big difference between a 1/2 mile and a 5 mile one-way trip to the field. What do you do? Because I have watched you chop, and I don't see the chopper sit idle waiting for trucks and wagons.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do to keep that very expensive chopper making money and not just sitting there at an idle?
Yeah. So, I mean, from a custom operator stand, it's, the dairy that owns their own chopper, that chopper, for these large self-propelled choppers, that chopper depreciates by the engine hour, upwards of $400 to $450 an hour. So there's the economics of, number one, just keeping that chopper moving. Number two, you want to make sure there's an even flow coming into the bunker. You don't want it. Sometimes that's a challenge for packing and ultimately the density of the bunker when you have a group of 6 pieces of equipment that come and dump, and then nobody dumps for 15 or 20 minutes. So you kind of want an even flow, and there's a little bit of an art to that. For our operation, we use a lot of tractors and wagons. Guys don't want semis for compaction. So our wagons hold about 28 to 32 ton of corn silage. So we know on average road conditions, we need one wagon per 3/4 of a mile. But that's a very good and fair question. You have to make sure that's all kind of lined up. Some custom choppers charge by the engine hour, so you also want to make sure it's getting maximized. But so there's a lot of different angles from that, but you just want a nice even flow coming into that bunker. So the most important job of putting up corn silage is pushing and packing. You want them to have a nice even flow.
I was just going to say, let's take that flow, and take it to packing.
Yeah,
and I, we don't have to hide from the fact I occasionally on a weekend drive tractor for you, and in the world that we both live in, is kind of nice. You see a lot of these farms with 4 and 5 8-wheel articulated tractors clawing around on the bunk. I see what I think of as being plenty of weight thrown at these bunkers, but what's your recommendation for what needs to be there?
So Mike, as far as your question, how much weight do we need up on that pile? That's a very good question. So the way I look at it is for a weight on the pile, you need 1,000 pounds of weight for every ton per hour coming in. So basically for every 100 tons, say you're bringing in 100 ton per hour, you need 100,000 pounds of tractor weight. So if we're easy figuring 100 tons per hour, that would be equivalent on average to 2 tractors up on the pile, pushing and packing. The reason I think it's a great question is Agri-King has done bunker densities for a long time. And when I look back from 2000, when I look at the numbers from 2008 to 2015, we were getting bunker densities. Farms are doing a great job. We're getting up in that 22 to 24 pounds dry matter per cubic foot. And I'm just thinking in my mind, like back then, if somebody got a 600 horsepower chopper that came out, like we were like, oh, that's a big chopper. Now we're dealing with a lot of choppers that are 900 or 1,000, 1,100 horsepower, right? So that's a lot more tons per hour coming in. Unfortunately, not on every farm, but if you take it as an average, bunker densities have come down some. So we're doing a great job of harvesting a lot of feed in a small amount of time, but we've kind of shifted away from, we haven't kept up on the packing tractors. So some things to look at as far as when you're doing those equations, a lot of farms are going to be like, holy, no way, I'm way off, right? So maybe instead of trying to find another 1, 2, or 3 tractors to get up there for weight, because we're just looking at weight, right? A simple thing would be, do I have a 3-point hitch on the back of our articulated tractor or row crop tractor? Most row crop tractors do, some articulated do, but depending on the size of your tractor, you can get something built and throw yourself on another 10 to 18,000 pounds of weight on the back of the tractor. Do I have weights on the axles of the tractor? And that's another way to accumulate 10 to 12,000 pounds. Loading your tires. I know chloride can be corrosive and there's some discussion about that, but beet juice is good. Load those tires up. I mean, some of these big tires on these big tractors, you can gain 24,000 pounds. 24,000 pounds might be a bit much, but you can gain a good amount of weight on doing that. And then the conversation comes up, well, I don't want to pack my fields when I'm chisel plowing, or you can load those babies up for first cutting hay. If you're doing hay or when you're chopping hay, you can load them up right before corn silage, and then you can load it out. You can get storage tanks and store the stuff right on farm. So first thing to look at is maybe how much, and you have to know, if that's the first question, how much does my tractor weigh? Either if you don't have a scales, run it on a scales, and so you know what your starting point is. And then from there, try to add more weight to the tractor through those different ways, because that's easier, right, than having another piece of iron up there and then more manpower. So know what you're starting with and see what you can do to get that weight higher. But I do kind of feel as an industry, we have definitely seen densities go backwards as we've added more horsepower to choppers, and we're not quite catching up to the packing tractors. Another observation is so extremely common is dependent on your piles and how you're doing it. Each push tractor, keep that thing on the pile. Don't let it come off. Now, some guys, they do a circle thing where they drive off the pad, and that's perfectly fine, but keep those things moving. all too often, especially at a long day, it's pretty boring pushing and packing, or can be pretty boring. You'll see somebody push up a load and then they back off and then they're on their phone waiting for the wagon to dump. Some of these wagons, I mean, all these little things add up, right? Some of these wagons take 1.5 minutes, 1.75 minutes to unload. So that's at 12 loads an hour, you're not even, that throws that equation up, because for 15 minutes, the guy's not even on that tractor is not even on the pile. They're sitting there texting. So just some basic things of human nature, keep that on a pile, keep it moving really slow. When that, if it's possible, when that semi or wagon's dumping, keep that thing up there going back and forth until that wagon's empty and you can safely get down and push it up. So it's all those little things can help us catch back up. We're capable of it, but first we need to know how far we're off. And you just need to know what's the weight of my tractors I have up there and look at it and see if you're off, what you can do to correct it.
You make a really brilliant point. It was one I was going to bring up. You look at the money invested in a self-propelled chopper or a big pull-type chopper and a tractor to pull it. For whatever your farm needs, this is a large investment.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that the person running the chopper needs to be top shelf. This guy's going to have to be paying attention. Even though you've got GPS and a million other things that's doing some of the work for you, that seems like the highest calling for an operator. When it comes to the person driving truck and hauling wagons, not running cars off the road and not hitting mailboxes is about, that's the maximum we're going
it's
for.
More than that, but yeah.
Talk a little bit. You mentioned it, needing to keep moving. It interests me, and you're right. I think it has to be, even with radio and everything else you put in a tractor nowadays, one of the most boring jobs on a farm to be packing silage.
Mm-hmm.
But I see such a variation in the operator skill there, because there's people who do as much harm every pass. It never occurred to me till you pointed it out one time. Well, yeah, he's in a tractor with a blade, but he's not allowed to put it down. That's just wait. We don't let him use the blade. He just drive. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, it's a very good, very fair point. I mean, it's literally an art, right? So like simple things as far as when you're pushing, I mean, you want it in layers of 4 to no more than 6 inches, right? Because if you just push a huge pile blob and just kind of put it there and that pile stands 8 foot tall, you'll never get that compacted. So you just want nice, even layers going up. Slopes, you don't want any more than, definitely don't want any more than a 3-to-1 slope or 33 degrees. Because you get too much slippage in some tractors, or if it's really wet silage, that might be too much. So, and what you don't want to see is when a push tractor is pushing up, sometimes you'll see it push out, and that just kind of ruins literally 2 feet below it. You never really quite get that area back. There's nothing you can really do to, unless, you stop chopping and you kind of repush that area. It's just, more than likely is not going to happen. So that area is just kind of, there's just going to be a spot where it's not going to be very good with density. So yeah, there's a lot of things like that's very crucial, and you wouldn't think it'd be that hard, but operating a push tractor, it's very difficult, and it's sometimes hard to see, but to get that, 4 no more than 6 inch layer from down here to up there. And that's another important part we didn't discuss earlier is, I should have brought up earlier is just like, where's this silage going? How many tons is going here? What's this going to look like? That's probably, I forgot to bring it up. That's probably the most forgotten thing on the farm is nobody talks to the push guy about, hey, we're going to put this pad that's designed for 25,000 tons of silage. We're going to put 28,000 in there this year. Like, they don't have that conversation. So it's important for the guys shaping a pile to have an idea what the heck they're creating this artwork, this sculpture, to know what's going to be going into it. And so often, like, it kind of gets forgotten about. And then there's a poor guy pushing, and you tell him, like, we got another 300 acres to put on there. And like, oh, we thought we were done or almost done. Like, I don't know where I'm going to put it. Well, then it's kind of late in the game to address it. So that part is very important as well.
That leaves us just the third piece, We've touched on people and operating. One of the things that's always impressed me when I watch one of your crews work, you've got everybody in a high-vis shirt, vest, jacket. We've talked about some of the operator skill aspect. Talk about the level of safety that you're looking to enforce and encourage with your people.
So with all these moving pieces that's going on, it's just a recipe for a very dangerous environment. And unfortunately, every fall there is accidents and sometimes deaths you hear about in the state or the upper Midwest or all over. So yeah, a basic one is high vis. Especially, I mean, you don't like to chop at night, but the reflections, but sometimes inevitably you have to. I mean, we always try to start at 6 a.m. and we stop about 10 p.m. So there's a little bit dark when you start and dark when we finish. High vis is very good. And everybody just understanding to stay out of the way. I mean, that these tractors are so big on the push pile and these guys are up there all day pushing and packing. It's hard to see behind them. So know the blind spots. Do not let people be walking around piles or even out in the field by the chopper. I mean, if somebody wants to ride on the chopper, I mean, it has to be communicated and you have to visually see them and they have to be waved in. So the high vis is very important and just understanding everybody's on the same page. I think personally, my wife might watch this, so I'll have to be honest. I like if I'm helping chop or running the chopper, like I don't like to stop because it's just like you got a lot to do. But in all honesty, the best thing we do is if we take a 15-minute break in the morning, we'll take a half-hour break at lunchtime and then again at dinner time. And we have the monitor watching how many tons per hour we're chopping. And right before we have those breaks is when we're the most inefficient. So the guys running beside the chopper are getting a little bit more sloppy. So when you're running the chopper, you're chasing, with the gooseneck, you're chasing the trucks, and it slows everybody down. And when we stop and take those breaks and everybody stands around, they joke and, say, oh yeah, did you see what so-and-so did going down the road? And, you kind of, when everybody gets back in their piece of equipment, they're fresh. And all of a sudden you just immediately pick up any lost tons chopped from that break. So making sure people don't get wore out. Another problem we run into is when we get started with corn silage, those are long days. We try to do it in 2 shifts, and all of a sudden it gets to be at 3 or 4 o'clock when there's hopefully a shift change. And guys like, well, no, I'm good. I don't need anybody to take over for me. It's, people are good and at their best about 8 to 10 hours a day during harvest and try to rotate them out. So when you're running people continually for days on end at 12 or 14-hour days, that gets very dangerous. And it's always nice to have people that have to leave that are mad because they have to leave because they're going to look forward to coming back in the morning versus running them hard. And 2 weeks after you get started, they're just literally exhausted. So literally just thinking about the whole team and keeping people fresh. My thing is always like, I want people here because it's fun and they enjoy it. So they might be able to work a lot of long days up front, but we still have to finish up. But really, ultimately, a lot of that goes back to safety. I mean, it's just when people get tired and worn out, that's when mistakes happen. And unfortunately, that's when bad, sometimes tragic accidents happen. So safety, it's my biggest fear of corn chopping time is people's safety.
This has just been absolutely wonderful. I appreciate you being able to pull from all the different parts of yourself. Any wrap-up thoughts when it comes to getting ready for corn silage harvest?
I think just communicate with your team. If you're having problems with whoever the chopping crew is with their kernel processor, have the conversation with them. Have your nutritionist talk with them. Have them explain it. I was looking at, I explained to somebody once, it's like, they said, if we loosen up our kernel processor, we go through 4 less gallons of fuel an hour. We can chop a few more tons. And I was like, okay, well, if you think about it, 4 gallons of fuel savings, you get a little bit more tons. 4 gallons at $4 gas. It's going to cost you 9 cents a cow a day because you might have to feed a little extra corn because of the kernel processing. And you literally saved, I think it was 1/8 of a penny per cow per day in fuel savings and increased capacity of that chopper. So at the time, the chopping crew might think, we're going to save 2,000 gallons of fuel this fall by opening up more than what they say. But in a whole big gamut, I mean, make sure that they have to understand the value of doing a good job kernel processing. They have to understand, and I feel that's the biggest problem. Whether it's custom harvester, like I said, even on farm, we have different members of the family or different management roles, and that communication of what the whys isn't there. So I think that's one of the most important things. That's one thing I kind of focus on heavily the last couple of years of the farms I work on is the whys of why we want this stuff chopped the way we want it and how it impacts the whole big picture of the dairy.
Perfect. Well, Chris, I think that's been a wonderful, wonderful A to B to C on getting ready for corn chopping. We probably need to allow you 5 or 10 minutes to tell us what you learned today, but take a stab at it.
I'm gonna just use Andrew's great just his reason for chopping a little higher, and I love that. Like eventually, it's just gonna end up in the field anyway, so that's a great thing to take home and remind people of that. So thanks, Andrew. You can find us on just about any of the socials, and if you like what you heard, please like us and share it. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, please email us at podcasts@agriking.com. All right, Andrew, Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, guys.